Our scripture lesson this morning comes from that Old Testament large and I'd say largely understood book, Job, from the 17th chapter, verses 1 through 16 in the Message version. And it's written as to gain your insight and your emotional response. You'll see as I read for you. My spirit is broken, my days used up, my grave dug and waiting. See how these mockers close in on me. How long do I have to put up with their insolence? Oh God, pledge your support for me. Give to me in writing with your signature. You're the only one who can do it. These people are so useless. You know firsthand how stupid they can be. You wouldn't let them have the last word, would you? Those who betray their own friends have a legacy of abuse to their children. God, you've made me the talk of the town. People spit in my face. I can hardly see from crying so much. I'm nothing but skin and bones. Decent people can't believe what they're seeing. The good-hearted wake up and insist, I've given up on God. But principled people hold tight, keep a firm grip on life, sure that their clean, pure hands will get stronger and stronger. Maybe you'd all like to start over, to try it again, the bunch of you. So far, I haven't come across one scrap of wisdom in anything you've said. My life's about over. All my plans are smashed. All my hopes are snuffed out. My hope that night would turn into day. My hope that dawn was about to break. If all I have to look forward to is a home in the graveyard, if my only hope for comfort is a well-built coffin, if a family reunion means going 6 feet under, and the only family that shows up is worms, do you call that hope? Who on earth could find any hope in that? No. If hope and I are to be buried together, I suppose you'll all come to the double funeral. Let the people of God say, ouch. As I thought of this passage in light of the theme of this week from our Soul Reset sermon series, which we are in, it began to sink into me. You know, many people find themselves in a crisis at some time. Almost all of us will be in crisis. Now, the backstory to this theme, life in crisis, is that Job's friends whom he's addressing here, this is a response to their actions, started out really good. They started out good because they didn't say anything. Can you imagine that? They just sat with him in his grief, in his loss, in his pain. They just sat. But like all human beings, they felt like they had to say something, and therefore they said the wrong thing. That's what many of us do sometimes when we feel like we just have to say something. And so Job's response to their negativity, to their accusations, to their maybe you sin type of attitude was mixed, you might say. But I believe it can serve as an example to us of wisdom that was gained through struggle, through loss, and through suffering. wisdom that God gives to us through this book, and wisdom that God seeks for us to embrace and then share with those whom we encounter, whether it is amongst our Willow Hill family, whether it's out in the community, in our jobs, and in our families outside of these walls. Wherever we are, this wisdom of embracing some sense of hope in the midst of desolate, what some might say are insurmountable situations, God's hope still is there, but just not so quickly. Sometimes we want to rush to the hope part, and so I love how the author of our sermon series, Junius B. Dotson, reminds us that there's a time that people need to just sit in their brokenness. Just let it all kind of surround you, and yes, it seems like overwhelm you, but don't try to rush through those times. And so we find ourselves, some of us, and maybe many of us, in uncomfortable situations because we don't want to sit in the brokenness. We want it all to be all right now. And we want to help someone, but we don't want to just sit in the brokenness with them. Dr. Dobson tells a story of in his life where he, as a pastor who had started new churches and been quite successful at it, found his life overwhelming once again. He tells the story of when his mother passed and how that came about. And so one day he said the phone rang, and it was his brother on the other end of the phone. And as he picked up the phone, his brother was sobbing and crying, and Junius could hear the medical personnel in the background working on someone, and his brother said it was his mother, and Junius could hear his sister-in-law crying and wailing as well, and his brother said to him, it's mom, it's his mother, she's gone, she's had some type of arrest or situation, and the EMTs, they're here trying to start her heart back and get her going again, and Julius, instead of immediately going into his brokenness, into his grief mode, as God would have us to do, he went into pastor mode, as we sometimes do in our professional, vocational situation. He went into take charge mode, control mode, calm, assurance, presence mode. And he said to his brother, are the EMTs close by to you? And his brother said, yes. And Junior said to them, hand the phone to them. And his brother did that. And then Junior said to the EMTs, he said, my mother and I have discussed this possible scenario, and she has discussed with me that she, should this happen, is ready to go to God. And she does not want any heroic measures, and so whatever you're doing, stop. Whatever you're doing, stop. And then Junior's heard some silence in the background. And then he heard his sister and his sister-in-law and his brother wailing and crying even louder. And then he hung up the phone, and for a moment there was silence on his end. And then he just, in the next moment, felt himself just collapse on the floor and cry and wail uncontrollably himself. And then his wife and his children rushed into the room to see what was the matter. And he told them it was just a whirlwind after that of grief and loss for him. He lost several close people in his family and in his relationships within a 6-month period. Not just his mother. And at the end of that 6 months of going in and out of grief and in and out of brokenness and in and out of pastor mode, he could not function anymore, because he had not allowed himself to just be broken. I think one word that can be used here to describe his descriptions is authentic. How many of us could be authentic in a situation like this? I am amazed and I guess a little bit impressed that this story describes one who could be so real. Our world does not teach us to be real. Our professional training in ministry does not teach us to be real. The world says put on that mask of strength. The world says be professional and methodical because people need to have order in times of crisis, and yes, they do, but God says to us that in the midst of life, there are times in which we are broken, but through the brokenness, hope will come through. It didn't say hope will just appear, but that through the brokenness, through the grief, through if we do not embrace some sense of hope and compassion and just being with people, that legacies will develop that will be passed down to generations that are unhealthy and unspiritual. And so God invites us to journey with others. God invites us, if it is us in crisis, to just let it all happen. And then to see beyond the physical earthly remnants, to see beyond the coffins and the graves and the hope for eternal destinations, to just embrace a hope in the midst of transitions. And so there's a poster here that I found during this past week that invites us to thrive through transitions. In this poster that we were hopefully able to embrace, we will see that there are 3 times and 3 opportunities to embrace these transitions. And this hope is a journey, if you would. In this poster, it was described for me that these transitions are when we have endings, and how in these endings there are times in which we deal with loss. And so as we deal with this loss, there is a time to fear the unknown, even as we want to control things, that it's all right if we fear the unknown of the loss of a loved one, or fear the unknown of the loss of a job, or fear the unknown of so many major transitions, maybe in our church community or our work or our home community. And then there are times where we just absorb the shock. That's all we can do, is absorb the shock. We can't do anything but just absorb it. And then we find that there are people who find themselves in a time of placing blame at this time when things are ending and when we are dealing with loss. We place blame. And then it's natural for us to have anger. Anger is one of those things that people have been taught to say, no, we should never have. But it was all right that Job had anger at the loss of his family, the loss of his health, the loss of his wealth, the loss of his position in the community. It was okay to be angry, and God understood that. And then we move into the next major phase of a transitional period where it's kind of like a neutral zone. People ask you how you're feeling, and you're like, I guess I'm okay. I'm just kind of numb. A neutral zone. And then anxiety may come about, and confusion, because we're trying to figure out what a new normal should look like and how we really should feel and where are we now. And so anxiety rises in the midst of the uncertainty. And then what I hope and what psychologists say we should hopefully have in our midst, but what I hope that we at Willow Hill and other places become for our friends when they find themselves in these contexts, are seeds of hope. That we help plant seeds of hope, not condemnation, not direction, not glossing over the reality, but just seeds of hope. Someday not your when. There will be a brighter moment, a hopeful time in your life. And then finally, that third stage where the person or the situation begins to see that there are new beginnings possible, that they're setting new goals, whether it's an individual person or whether it's a family or whether it's a community of faith or some other institution, a new business situation or opportunity. The new goals are arising and then they begin to gain clarity. And then one can begin to reinvent themselves. And a church can reinvent itself. A business can reinvent itself with tools and skills and networks that you grab hold of in the midst of all of this transition. Networks that are supportive, networks that are hopeful, networks that are inventive and innovative in our lives personally, professionally, and spiritually. This coming week, our author, Junius B. Dobson, and I want to invite you to be on a journey with God that leads to freedom. I hope that you are encouraged by Job's story and Dr. Dodson's story and other sermons. I shared a little bit of my story too. I pray that these stories will invite you to embrace a vulnerability. For it is through vulnerability that I have read and that I have experienced that the keys to unlock a deeper path of relationships with God is possible. Relationships with one another. One of your former pastors, I believe Ken Holgren, used to always say it's all about the relationships. And I believe that the relationships are what carry us through and hold us over. And a relationship with God and a relationship with one another form that spiritual cross that God invites us to, especially at this time of year as we are on our Lenten journey, a journey of not just exploration, but internal reflection, a journey of taking on and giving up, not for our own personal edification, but so that we might seek to embrace what Christ went through on his journey, his 40-day journey. And so God calls us into that spiritual place of journeying today. In the midst of life in crisis, God is there with us.